wanted to start by saying thank you all for making time today. Really excited to go through what we have planned for the session today, and just to kind of set the stage and set some expectations. We're going to go through a lot today. We have around 30-40 minutes, so you want to make sure that the session is as insightful and as helpful to everyone attending. And really, we're going to be focusing on practical use cases of generative AI in customer success. And I'm here with Greg and Suraj, who have a moment to introduce themselves, two individuals that I've worked closely with over the past 2 years on this specific topic. So really looking forward to the fireside chat. But before I get started, whenever I have these sessions, I like to start with a bit of a level set on the context and the state of AI as it stands in North America. So what I'd like to ask is everybody who's attending and joining the session, if you could just pop in the chat box, what your prediction is for what percentage of companies are adopting AI in the USA and what percentage of companies are adopting AI in Canada. If you just put that in the chat there. And I can't see my screen, so yeah, if there are any responses.
It's 75% US, 50% Canada. That's one.
Okay.
There's 60% US, 50% Canada.
Yeah. So those are great.
40 US, Canada.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm just gonna share that right now. 50% adoption of AI in the USA and 30% in Canada. And this is from a McKinsey study and the Days School of Public Policy out in Toronto. So why I say that is I think this presents a huge opportunity for growing and emerging enterprises, not because the numbers are relatively lower than what people typically expect, but because it just shows what opportunity exists for organizations to take advantage of this technology and gain a competitive advantage, not only to larger enterprises, but within their competition. And I think specifically in Canada, with the lower rate, it shows that there is a global economy that clients are playing in, and organizations are taking advantage of this technology, and those are the competitors that we're working against. So wanted to set the context there, and then go through what we're going to be covering today. So I'm going to take a moment to introduce the panelists. We're going to then go over a bit of some context as to why AI and strategically why organizations are looking to double down on their investments in AI. And we'll go through a specific demo on some of the customer success use cases that were not only implemented at Plative, but also what we're seeing customers leveraging in the market. And then we'll go over, how the rubber meets the road. So some of the challenges that we find clients having when they're thinking of leveraging AI. We'll then have some time for Q&A. We'll have some moments there for people to ask questions throughout, but this is what we can expect in the next few minutes. Yeah. So I'll introduce myself, Lizzie here, solution architect with Plative. A bit about my background. I started formally trained in computer science and business at the University of British Columbia. I spent some time working at Deloitte and Traction on Demand. So Traction on Demand was acquired by Salesforce, and worked as a solution engineer for a little under 3 years at Salesforce, supporting commercial business, and also working in the analytics black belt program, so helping customers operationalize and leverage AI in the Canadian market. And I want to pass it over here to Suraj to have an introduction, and then we'll pass it over to Greg.
Hey everybody, I'm Suraj. I lead our Tableau solution engineering team for Canada. So we're accountable for all the things related to data analytics and AI at Salesforce, and working very closely with all of our Canadian customers. I've been at Salesforce for 6 years, and prior to that, my career has all been in cloud computing and cloud technologies, and implementing productivity software, CRM, analytics, and of course, working very closely the last 6 years with all of our customers here in Canada in driving that adoption of data and AI and analytics.
Thanks so much for that. And Greg, love to give you a chance there to do an intro too.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. Hi, everyone. Greg Delgenio, Chief Revenue Officer with Plative. So that means I run our sales, marketing, pre-sales, solution architect team. I've been with the firm now for about 8 years. Before that, carried quotas of all shapes and sizes throughout companies like Lightspeed, Salesforce, Apple, and more recently, over the last, call it 18 months or so, I've been working with a lot of our customers on their own AI strategy in CX. So really excited to dig into these topics today.
Amazing. And been a pleasure again. Thank you both for taking the time. It's been a pleasure to continue to collaborate and partner with you both. And I think what I'd love to just kind of level set with everyone is just around, where are we from an AI standpoint? We're talking about predictive AI. We're talking here, you might be hearing about generative AI, but I want to be very clear on when we say AI, when we refer to generative AI, that's really taking in and consuming using these large language models to then produce this new information, and also providing things like sentiment analysis, like summaries of large amounts of information. And when we're referring to predictive AI, just to call out, that's really what we're referring to, kind of the statistical side of machine learning. So consuming inputs and variables and then deciding what's the likelihood for a lead to convert. So those are just two distinctions there. Just I want to make sure that that we have covered. And as we go through this, I do want to start the conversation here just from I personally have seen a lot of noise, a lot of hype around why AI, why generative AI, and why should executives and organizations prioritize this. So Suraj, I'd love to get your perspective as to why should organizations be thinking about AI as part of their corporate strategy, and why now specifically?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to when you're thinking about AI, either just as a broad topic or specifically looking at either predictive AI or generative AI. My perspective on it is that it all comes down to the outcome that you're trying to drive and how to get to those outcomes faster, more consistently. Those are the things that are really important. I think sometimes because AI is especially right now, generative AI is the shiny object. It can be a case of, well, we have to use AI because everyone's going to use AI, or we have to. What else would we do it for? And I think part of where we like to work closely with companies is to help them understand, okay, where are you going to apply that? How do you make sure that when you're leveraging AI, you're using it tied to specific use cases that you can then attribute the impact on a specific outcome? I think we're going to see some of those examples in the CX side of things, but everything really kind of comes down to how can we use this as a tool to make us better at either predicting what is the right action to take at the right time, or when we have to take that action, how can we do it efficiently and consistently?
Yeah. I know that we've talked a lot about, when it comes to AI, it can seem like this new shiny object that you're trying to go against, but, how do you cut through that noise and make sure that it's creating value for the organization? And I'd love to pass it over to you, Greg. I know at Plative, we use AI on a day-to-day basis, and we're working very closely with customers in getting this stood up. Why should customers really be thinking about prioritizing this as part of their corporate strategy from your point of view, and maybe some anecdotes there from how Plative went about it?
Yeah, so I think it's really hard for people to see past, or many people to see past, the hype right now, and that's pretty understandable. I mean, within the context of the last, call it 2-3 years, first it was all about fintech, then it was all about blockchain, then it was all about the metaverse. I know that the people who are streaming this won't be able to emoji react, but if you're here with us on the Google Meet, you can react now if you want to raise your hand or thumbs up if you remember the metaverse or if you use it today. But through each of those trends, the same talking heads would be on the same TV networks every day talking about how, this is the future. This is what you need to adopt for your personal life or your business. And I think we're hearing the same sort of vernacular and rhetoric today about AI. So I think that any cynicism out there could be warranted. Here's the difference, though, that I think is really important. I think that in many ways, AI has sort of made it out of the proof of concept phase and has already made it further than where any of the previous hype cycles have. And that's mass adoption in both individual adoption, like Bard or ChatGPT, and in the enterprise, like Anthropic and Salesforce Einstein GPT, and all of the sort of more exciting things we've been seeing from vendors like Databricks and things along those lines. And there's some things that AI is still not so good at, like, for example, writing compelling sales emails on the first try. I've yet to see a single AI written sales email that reads like something I'd directly respond to as a buyer. But there are some things like synthesizing data or drawing trends on analysis that AI can do, frankly, 10 times better than most humans can do right now. And I think that that's what people should really be narrowing their collective focus on. And that's some of what we're going to show today. So I guess to directly answer your question, the why now is we're finally at a point where there are real life examples of how companies are leveraging this today without straying away from their existing path of work.
Yeah, that's another one. And I think, as a solution architect, observing and working through a lot of the work that we're doing with customers and also within our organization, I think one of the big takeaways that I'm taking from what you just mentioned is really narrowing it down on where the value is going to come from, and ensuring that if it's productivity, giving time back to your teams, how and where that value is going to be captured. And I think that's a consistent trend that I've been seeing. And I think the last question that I had just before we go into the demo here, and I'd love to give both of you a chance to kind of touch on this, but when it comes to corporate strategy and when it comes to tying that to AI, what do you think some of the small takeaways that a customer can take away from this to think about how to align those two things with all the noise that's coming about? And maybe Suraj, I'll pass it to you this time, and then and have it over to Greg, and then we can go into a little bit of a demonstration here.
Yeah, there's a few factors. I think the one starting point that I was trying to kind of orient back to is find something that is worth solving. Find a use case that's going to have an important enough, a large enough, significant enough business value impact that it's worth solving in a different way. I think once we identify that, then you can kind of start going deeper into the mechanics of how you're going to solve that and where you're going to leverage additional tools and processes such as predictive or generative AI. Within each one of those as well, there will be other considerations to take into account. Within predictive AI, there's the outcome of a predictive model is to predict a number or predict the likelihood of a certain scenario happening, as an example. And so making sure that the data points that you're leveraging, for example, don't have bias baked into them. That's a very important consideration with predictive AI, to ensure that that bias isn't then being introduced into your decision making, because that's really what it's going to enable, is taking the right decision more consistently. Generative AI has other factors that take into account, especially the vast majority of use cases are going to be leveraging models like Anthropic and OpenAI. And so how do you ensure that you are able to engage with this with a semblance of security and trust, knowing that for a business to get any value out of generative AI, you're going to have to use your own first-party data. So you better do it in a way that's secure and it isn't sacrificing that PII information. That's been a really big both philosophical and technological focus at Salesforce. Is it's not just about the bells and whistles of what generative AI can do, like generating a case summary, for example, but it's how do we do it that's leveraging corporate data in a methodology that doesn't sacrifice the security of that corporate and customer data. So those are the factors that will then come into consideration. The starting point always, though, find that one use case, find a narrow use case that has a significant business impact, and then focus on implementing that deeply across your stack.
Amazing. And Greg, anything to add to that just before we go over a little bit of practical, tangible examples that we can share here?
Yeah, maybe just to underline, highlight, however we want to say, something that Suraj touched on that I think is really important. I speak with a lot of our customers about this exact topic on almost a daily basis now. And what we see time and time again is a whole lot of enthusiasm, especially on the heels of Dreamforce or on the heels of Suite World or Salesforce World Tour, but a general lack of sort of intentionality behind what exactly they're hoping to achieve through the adoption of AI.
Mm-hmm.
So my advice to business leaders and CX leaders would, especially now in Q4, be to start with the strategic imperatives over the next 12 months. If we don't have those ironed out for next year, for example, then let's make sure that we gather our leadership team, we huddle up, we come up with, call it 1 to 3 to 5 imperatives for next year that at the company level, we could all kind of get around the table and agree on. And once you have those lined up, you can check your AI readiness. You can find some quick wins and point solutions, some of which you might see today. We're going to go through a deck, and then we're going to go through a real life example within Slack. But if anyone on this call is hungry for ideas, hopefully you'll get some when you leave this call. And I would advise anyone who's trying to think about their own AI strategy to really start with those imperatives first, start with the intended outcome first, and find a way to measure to those outcomes throughout the course of whatever project you decide to take on, whether internally or with a vendor.
Yeah, really, really appreciate both those insights, Suraj and Greg. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to give a little bit of a background before we dive into the demonstration. And again, everyone, feel free to ask questions. If you're joining right now, just to call out, you can ask questions through the little K box here. Just go ahead and ask a question if you have any questions as we go through this. But touch on what you just mentioned, Greg, Suraj. This is just an example of how we see that having your key imperatives, knowing that AI is a function or capability that's going to help drive your outcomes, and aligning that. Now, what I'm going to go through here is some examples. Some of these are generally available within Salesforce's stack today. Some of this is what we've been building out and working through at Plative to enable for our customers. And this is just an example of first touch resolution call summaries. So being able to use generative AI to actually come up with service replies based on grounded data that's coming in from your CRM and that trusted layer of generative AI embedded into your CRM. So you can imagine, the business impact here for a lot of team members is, if you have a lot of backlog of service tickets, this is one way that you can actually drive productivity. The next is actually what one of the use cases that we've rolled out at Plative, which I think has been phenomenal to see. Obviously, Plative is a professional services business that we focus within Salesforce, NetSuite integration, as well as AI and data. And we have a lean team and trying to get the most productivity, as well as ensuring teams are able to do more with less, but also enjoying what they're doing. This is an example of being able to surface in your layer of engagement. This is Slack, what you're looking at, but behind Slack we have Tableau. We have a generative model that's helping determine utilization from a descriptive standpoint. So being able to understand what these trends mean is just one example. And shout out to our VP services here, Mifta, for all the work that's gone into all of this. And we also then have a use case around call summaries. You sit on a call, get a meeting summary, and how to use generative AI to then do things like sentiment analysis. And if you want to take that a step further, you can see what overall summary this is, key decisions. And then also, if you wanted to kind of aggregate this out, you can have a conversation with it, but then you can actually see on a holistic level across your accounts what's the sentiment that has been received within these specific client meetings. So this is kind of just a high-level overview, but I'm going to actually let Greg here walk through a real example of how this all comes together and how we've been leveraging some of this at Plative. So I'll stop sharing my screen here and Greg, give you the reins. Yeah.
Awesome. So before I start that off, I'm just going to set the stage. Let's say that I am me in my daily day-to-day life, and I want to review a call that occurred between, let's say, Ludzi and Suraj to check in on the status of their upcoming AI webinar, because it's important that we follow up on all of the next steps that invariably came out of that meeting, right? So to do that, I'm going to go straight to the epicenter for AI at Plative, which is basically where we address or cover AI in all of our day-to-day life, and that's Slack. So as you can see here, you're looking at a couple things. So I'm gonna take you through this. The middle of the screen is a channel that's called Signals, and basically what Signals is that it covers and records all of our conversations. For anybody who joined the webinar earlier, you would have seen the Plative note taker. For anybody who's used Gong or anyone who uses any sort of conferencing solution, that's something that's not very new to people, right? Call recording and auto recording for Zoom and Google Meet, this is all pretty standard stuff. Teams and Citrix as well. But on the back end, it's going to send all of these calls into the AI model that we've created. And then it's going to do a few things. It's going to create a sentiment analysis, which colors that call red, yellow, or green, which aligns up to the sentiment of the customer. In this case, it's found Suraj at Salesforce. So it's given Suraj the Salesforce moniker here. And the way that it does that is he has an @salesforce.com email address. It's going to find that in our Salesforce database and connect Suraj with Salesforce. So it's given us a sentiment score of 4 out of 5. We had a good call. Overall positive collaborative discussion and planning, that's all fine and good, right? It also gives us a call summary. So the call summary says that we discussed logistics for the upcoming AI webinar. I got the date wrong, but that's okay. We might have actually had it on the 17th before we moved it to the 16th. It has us conducting it as a virtual meeting. We talked about doing it in the office. That's a no. So you could see that there's the summary, the decisions, the issues, the actions, more context, and then it gives us this really handy link to the notes, the transcript of the meeting, and the recording of the meeting, which is actually held in Gong, which is the platform, the technology that we use to record the meetings in the first place. But let's say, for example, that I don't get enough information from this. So let's say that I want to ask Plato, which is the name of our bot. Any customer, any organization can create their own. So let's tag Plato and let's say, what next steps does Ludzi have? And what's basically going on here in the background, since Plato is essentially a large learning model that has been given the gift of historical context, it knows that I'm asking it a question about this meeting because I've replied in the Slack thread. Okay, that's a really important note. So based on the meeting notes, some next steps for Ludzi include finalizing the agenda, so on and so forth. So it's basically giving me, if I had nothing to do with this call, which most of the calls in the organization I don't have anything to do with, but especially if it's a customer, I want to get their sentiment, right? So that's exactly what I'm trying to do. So it's giving me all that information. You can see with a very human-like tone, it's giving me the answers. Now I've got a bunch of bullet points here, and I could deduce that Ludzi's probably going to have to spend a lot of time on this. Remember, we're a professional services firm. So if I have a resource like Ludzi, who's conducting AI webinars and doing workshops for all of our customers, I probably don't want to tie him up, but I need to be able to see how much utilization he has. So I'm going to ask Plato a command, a very simple command, util Ludzi.
I hope it doesn't get me into any trouble.
That's okay. Everyone laugh at Ludzi in shame. No, I'm just kidding. As I mentioned before, we set Plato's context window to include internal systems like Salesforce, NetSuite, Google Meet, Tableau, and a lot more actually. So what's happening right now in the background, typically this takes 60 seconds or so, is that the AI is searching Tableau for utilization dashboard, drilling down into Ludzi's name, drilling down into all of his information, and it's going to pull up what it thinks is most helpful to me. So what's popped up here, and more stuff is going to pop up, but let me just expand this. What's popped up is our Tableau dashboard. This is literally a screenshot from Tableau. We've configured this dashboard. We have it for every individual. It's dynamic so that you could type in the name of the person and you could see the information. So as you can see, you've got an over-under report here. So this is Ludzi's utilization history, right? We're looking into the day in the life of Ludzi. He's been pretty far over his utilization, right? And I could kind of see that just from this. But let's say that I'm just a CRO. I'm just a salesperson. I don't understand exactly what all of these charts mean. So let me get out of here and back into the thread. What you've seen Plato, our app, do is it looks at the Tableau data and it gives an analysis of the data that I might be able to understand. And it says that Ludzi's util consistently exceeded his target. Everyone clap for Ludzi. Nicely done, Ludzi. His actual util started at 24.5 against a target of 18, right? So as we can see, Ludzi's killing it. He's doing well. Not so fast. Forward-looking, 6-week outlook. Over the next 6 weeks, he's projected to underperform his 18-hour util target. Well, guess who this is good news for? Me, because I need Ludzi's time to build out this AI webinar with Suraj. So now I know Ludzi's got a little bit of time. I got to fill him up with some work. Good thing that Suraj and Ludzi had this call. He's got some next steps. I could put some work on his plate, right? I just want to do a quick recap, but before I do, overall conclusions, recommendations. Here's my top 3 observations and recommendations based on the provided context. Strong historical utilization. Nice job, Ludzi. Forward-looking utilization is below target hours. This signals a risk of underutilization without intervening. Underestimated his actual utilization. So what's happening here? As a sales leader, as a CEO, as any leader in the business, I have the ability to get this in-depth analysis, which what I was talking about at the beginning of this whole workshop, right? Was if I wanted to get all of this information without tools like this, I would have to take probably an hour of Ludzi's time or a staffing manager's time or, forbid a team meeting to do this. So I've cut down the amount of time that would otherwise be billable for Ludzi. And if you multiply this by 100 professional services consultants, 1,000 professional services consultants, you could really start to see where the ROI comes into play. Now, keep in mind, the tools that I'm using to access this are my common language, the same way I would ask a business analyst, or frankly, the same way that before this, I would ask Ludzi directly. Slack, which is what we're all using every day, and Tableau, which is where all of our data analysis lives anyway. And the thing is about Tableau is I didn't even have to open up another tab, right? It just found the screenshot, pasted it in here. It's a static image, but if you want to go to the actual dashboard and see all this, of course, you could as well. So the one other thing that I wanted to show, because we talked about it a little bit earlier, is if I want to kind of zoom out and take a look at what Signals is entirely, right? This is a database now of every call, every interaction for every customer in my entire portfolio, right? So I'm getting all of those calls and all of those meetings showing up here with their own sentiment. But how do we get an understanding of our entire portfolio? We actually built that out, and we have, it's called Plato Sentiment, but we have a demo version that I'm going to show everybody. And the cool thing is, if you do this in any Slack channel, any Slack thread, you don't have to do a specific script or anything along those lines. It's going to pull it up. But essentially what that command does is it tells Plato to go and look for my sentiment dashboard and give me the news. This is something that a lot of professional services firms or CS organizations within software companies literally have a weekly or multiple times a week meeting to do for their customer portfolio. So what it's giving me here is my customer sentiment dashboard. Now, on the right-hand side, you're going to see all of my tier 1 accounts, which these are all fake names. On the left-hand side, you're going to see all of the reds that popped up week over week. And remember, these reds, yellows, and greens are the sentiment analysis that Plato assigns them, that the AI assigns them and learns over time. So as you can see in my tier 1 portfolio, I've got some greens, some yellows. Tier 2, I've got a lot of greens. That's great. And you could see by tier of customer, their sentiment over time over the last few weeks. Now, the really big, powerful aspect of all of this data is most software companies, professional services agencies, they don't get their customer sentiment most of the time until the renewal is up quarterly or the project is over, and that's too late to do anything. But the reason that it's hard to get it earlier is because nobody wants to spend time filling out customer satisfaction surveys. Every one of these signals was gathered without the customer having to fill out anything. All they gave us was their consent to be recorded on calls, which 9 out of 10 companies you work with, you get that consent anyway, right? So what you could see as well is in the background, I've been getting a lot of slacks from our AI bot, from Plato. And Plato says that overall sentiment, customer sentiment, is stable and positive with most scores in the 3 to 4 range. It gives me some outliers. My fictional company, Apex Media here, had a score of 2 on October 15th. This is a significant dip compared to the scores that they had on the 8th and 3 later dates. So maybe I want to look into that, right? And then it gives me an overall understanding of the red meetings, the yellow meetings, and then overall conclusions and recommendations where Plato is tying all of this together. So it knows these are the conclusions I should draw based on your customer sentiment over your entire portfolio. And the way that it gets all of that information is from analyzing the Tableau data. And the Tableau data is coming from my recorded calls and sentiment analysis built on top of it. So we use this, and this is no exaggeration, every day, much to the chagrin of many of our managers who have to now explain why the call was bad. And I was planning on writing an email. But now we have the ability to anticipate when a project might be not going the right direction and actually do something about it before it becomes a churn risk or a problem. So this is what we're trying to deliver at scale for these CX organizations. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and pass it back to you, Lindsay.
Thank you so much for that, Greg. And I want to just give a moment here for any questions just before we go into a bit more questioning around the process of getting this operationalized and some of the challenges and how to really overcome some of those. Any comments there? Again, feel free to ask questions through the Q&A function.
I guess while maybe some questions are coming up there, so prior to me being at Salesforce, my job was very similar, managing a bench of consultants and making sure that there was enough work to ensure that the utilization was consistently high month after month, and reporting back when there were dips and trying to find a solution. Yeah, the entire time I'm looking, I'm going, where was this for me 7 years ago? I could have been so much more effective.
Yeah, and I think what I'd love to just kind of take a step back and really get a sense, because we're using this every day at Plative, and it obviously took time to get this set up and get everyone trained and leveraging this in the most effective way. Greg, from a leadership standpoint, what would you say were some of the hiccups or some of the challenges with getting something of this scale rolled out across the enterprise, and how was that process?
Yeah, good question. I think the telltale sign, and this is not just AI, but the telltale sign of any thoughtfully developed solution that you roll out is that it works in a similar way to like an Apple or an Android product, in that if you leave a user alone with the product for long enough, they'll figure out how it works without much of a guide. And as you saw in the demo I showed earlier, I interacted with Plato, our AI LLM, in the same way that I would frankly ping Lindsay if I didn't have it, right? So my behavior doesn't really have to change all that much. I just change the Slack channel that I type it in, right? And I get comfortable with mentioning a robot. Maybe those two things. But to directly answer the question, I think the most challenging part of this type of implementation is the data, right? So does the company have confidence in the integrity of the underlying data? Is the data strategy such that we could pull and extract the right amount of data into a BI platform like Tableau? Is the data trustworthy? Something that Suraj mentioned back in the beginning of this chat. And if the answer to any of those questions are no, you have to solve that first. And that could be a really hairy problem if you've got a massive amount of data. But once you're over those humps, then the actual AI work that you've seen on this screen is something that if you've got a couple, Python developers, or you hire a couple Python developers, you give them 6 weeks and you give them enough of a spec, you could come up with that. And I think it's really important to note that this type of stuff is not just the AI that you see on, IBM commercials at the Super Bowl. This is real and practical and feasible for companies like us, and for companies even, much smaller than us. We're about 160 people, and there's companies that are much smaller than us leveraging this today. But I think a lot of it starts with the data and that strategy first. If you could figure that out, this is not really the hard part of a rollout and deployment. And the change management and user adoption, if it's done correctly, is as simple as slacking a colleague, slacking a teammate, and even easier sometimes than going into your ERP, CRM, or BI tool and actually looking for the right lens or dashboard. You could just ask Slack.
Yeah,
and there's so much similarity and overlap as well with, like, because I think back to our product development philosophy around leveraging things like AI, but also just going back to kind of the core values of our product development for the last 25 years. Anybody who's familiar with Salesforce has heard the phrase "clicks not code." We're really big on that. But if we even double click on what that means fundamentally, it's to bring the skill barrier down. If there's a large skill barrier for someone to use a tool or for someone to identify something that's insightful, chances are they're not going to use it, because the vast majority of people have something better to do. They have something more important to do. They have another job, and the tool is just there to help them do that. And so, like, that was one thing I think back to the way in which we've always developed Salesforce, the way in which we've always, Tableau has always been about helping people see and understand data in an easy manner. Those things are so fundamental to achieving that adoption. But then even down to this example, to your point, Greg, it's as simple as a chat. I might not know exactly how that LLM is working in the back end, but I know how to ask it a question. And I know how to ask a question that is relative to me in my world. And I think that's where there's such a huge opportunity to adopt these tools in a way that lowers the skill barrier and in turn drives an increased adoption and a greater net outcome.
I really appreciate both of those comments. I think, there's a lot of foundational work that needs to be put in place. And with that foundational work being put in place, you're really setting your team and the organization up for success to lower that barrier to entry, as well as ensuring that it's tied and consistent with where you're looking to capture value. And it reminds me of, we had a presentation last week with the Salesforce go-to-market team, and one of the things that they mentioned, which I thought was really interesting, was even at a large organization like Salesforce, a couple 50,000 people, getting some of these this tooling in place can seem like a really hard challenge, because there's a lot of dependencies. But I think for commercial accounts, so you think of businesses that are 50 to 5,000 people from a company size standpoint, I think there is a lot of opportunity to kind of leapfrog and to benefit from some of these technologies, because the cost of implementing and the cost of enabling teams to leverage this technology is going down. And I think there is sometimes a misconception there of large enterprises having the budgets and the skill sets to deploy these technologies, but there's also a huge opportunity for smaller emerging enterprises to start leveraging that. So I really appreciate the insights there. And I think one of the areas that I was looking into was, right, IDC had a report that was published, I think it was earlier this year, around AI projects that have been deployed, and I think it was 26% of those projects have been reported to have not gone as expected. And part of it was because of the technology not doing what was expected. So I'd love to, chat a bit about that. When it comes to getting a program of work or getting a project set up and executed, what would you, advise not only executives, but also team members that are leading programs? Like, how do you best think through that, mitigating some of that risk of any project or program, specifically as it relates to AI? And I think I can start with maybe Greg. You can kick us off.
Yeah, so I did see that report because you sent it to me and you told me you were going to ask about it before this. So thank you. But the first thing that came to mind actually was I'm surprised that number is not higher in terms of the risk of failure.
You took the words right out of my mouth. I'm amazed it's only 26%.
First thing I thought. I think about, there was a survey BCG put out called Flipping the Odds of Digital Transformation. And I'll try to find the right source so I could send it as a part of the follow-up if anyone's interested. But they said that 70% of all digital projects fail. And I would suggest that it's probably higher than that for AI projects, but there's just not enough AI projects yet. And I don't want that to scare anybody, because it all comes back to a few things, right? I said it at the beginning of our conversation. I think it's lack of clear goals from the jump. So lack of clear, why are we doing this as a mission statement? What are we trying to accomplish? Going back to those imperatives, if it's not aligned with those, then there's no way it's going to succeed, because there's no definition of success, or at least not one that's agreed on by everybody. The second one is lack of commitment from leadership. How many times have you heard our board wants us to come up with an AI strategy? Well, why, right? Is it because they want to hire multiple on your company? Well, that's cool. But at the end of the day, what are you trying to accomplish or solve? How are you going to connect that to value for your customers? And those two things could happen together, right? You could create customer value at the same time as creating EBITDA value. And ideally, that's exactly what happens. But a lot of these projects are driven by leadership, or driven by C-level, or driven by the board. And we kind of have to try to find a way to connect those things together. So that's number two. And then the last one, I think, is lack of the monitoring of those success metrics, because I mentioned it earlier too. Assuming we all agree why we're doing this, and assuming we have a clear definition of the goal, if we don't start this project with a clear weekly, bi-weekly steering committee of actually reporting on what success looks like, and not just talking about budget, but actual progress, then I think that puts you in a tough spot, because you kind of get in 6 months into the project, or 6 weeks into the project, you forgot what you're aiming for, requirements are pouring in, and now you've got to either do a restart or abandon the thing. And that's really any digital project. So if you could get those three things in line, then I think that you're going to set yourself up for much higher odds, flip the script, and probably have a less than 20% chance of failure, right? I think it would be lower than that if you could get all those three things working, because at that point, it's a technology problem. And assuming you've got smart people in the tech org rowing in the right direction, you could absolutely figure those issues out.
I really appreciate that. And Suraj, I want to give you a moment here. I know that just to respond to that, what are you seeing in the market, and what are you seeing from your customers when they're thinking about this?
Yeah, it's, I mean, a lot of similarities to what Greg was sharing as well, and I agree with pretty much everything, almost word for word, Greg. I think it's a similar nature, and I think sometimes it's, especially the shinier the technology is, and especially something like generative AI, first, almost like, my first thought of it is just kind of understand the demand that does go on our various data teams and our IT teams, who they usually get the demand from the business or demand from the customers. Hey, you have to do something. You have to use this technology. We need AI. That demand, especially with generative AI, is crazier than ever, because most technologies, people might be aware of it, but very few people truly understand it, and it takes time for someone to understand. Generative AI, thanks to ChatGPT, is something most of us understand so intimately that the demand that we're then putting on companies to adopt this is greater than ever before. And so I think that is, kind of recognizing that pressure right at the offset is I think very important. I think the key to mitigating that pressure and or rather directing it into a purposeful manner is to not really look at it in terms of adopting technology for the sake of technology, but it's about almost adopting a different way of doing something to achieve a better outcome. That's the actual goal. Technology is just an enabler and a way to get us there, which then gets us to the third element. And I'll share some tidbits around how to define what that outcome is and how to take what is, in essence, a really big thing of what are we trying to get to and break it down into the components that can then turn into a successful AI project. So, the first step, of course, is to identify that outcome, but then break that outcome down to the various contributors. Lindsay, you'll be familiar with this because we've worked together for years, so you know exactly the order of operations I'm going to share here. But for whatever that outcome is, first start with the people. Start with the end users. Who are the people who are going to be working every single day to achieve that outcome? Then double click. For those people, what does their current state look like? What business processes do they live in? What applications do they live in every single day? Within those business processes, what actions are they accountable to take? And whether they take those actions or not take those actions, Greg, to your point, monitoring the impact. How are we measuring the impact of those actions, whether taken or not taken? And once we get an understanding of that current state, what's the ideal state? Where are we today and where do we need to go? If we can define those building blocks, even for a narrow use case, and then implement deeply across those, that is going to lead to not just a greater sense of direction on your project, but a greater likelihood of success and an easier way to measure that success over time.
I really appreciate all the insight, and I think, hopefully, in the next few years, we'll see the number and percentage of customers and companies adopting AI growing across Canada and across the United States, and I'm sure of that. It's just, I think the call to action there is, who's going to take advantage of that, those benefits, and that value that's to be captured. And I do want to give a moment here before we do close out to the audience. If we don't have any questions, we'll wrap here. But I want to say thank you again, Suraj. Thank you again, Greg, for taking the time and walking through all of this. I find this extremely valuable. I hope everyone who attended did too. But again, if there are any questions, I just want to give a moment here for folks in the Q&A to ask any questions. If not, I think I'll go back.
If I can say one thing here, I really want to give a ton of credit here to the Plative team. Like it's so, again, especially with these terms of generative AI, the conversations and the excitement and the engagement is so much at a high level. It's so refreshing to see such a powerful application of this technology in a way that is easy for anybody to use, no matter what role that they're in. Whether you're decision makers like Greg, who are looking at the entire revenue base of a company, or if you are a professional services manager trying to make sure that your bench is well utilized. That the ease at which you've built this tool and have deployed it and are using it every single day. Kudos to the Plative team, truly, because I think this is the kind of thought leadership that we need at this stage right now, and for us to see that example, that this isn't just pie in the sky. This isn't just something that looks amazing, but we can't do anything about it. These are actual hard examples and things that any one of us can do. All we have to define is what that use case is. So, Plative team, kudos to you.
Thanks for that, Suraj. And Greg, I don't know if you have any final remarks or if there are any questions here, but
Just
yeah.
wanted to say thanks to everybody for joining. A recording of this will be sent out, and we have all of your emails, so you'll receive them, as well as a highlight reel of it. So if you want to refer back or send it to anybody on your team, please feel free. You should get that within a week.